Chapter 8. A taste of battle. As Royce kneels before the spectral figure, his heart pounds in his chest, torn between awe and confusion. His mind races with questions. What does this mean? Is this truly Octavia, or merely a vision conjured to torment him? The ethereal Octavia watches him with knowing gaze, the warmth in her emerald green eyes unwavering. She lowers herself slightly, bringing her face level with his, and whispers, "There are many decisions you must make, Royce. The path ahead is not set in stone, but time moves swiftly, and the tides of fate will not wait you." Before he can respond, the apparition begins to fade. The warmth of her presence slowly dissipates, and the glow of that once surrounded her body flickers like dying embers of a fire. Royce instinctively reaches out, desperate to hold on to whatever force he had just touched. But his hands grasp at nothing. In mere seconds, she vanishes completely, leaving him alone in the moonlight clearing. His breath comes in short, uneven gasp as he tries to steady himself. The river before him has returned to its natural state. Its water is no longer a portal of visions, but a simple, flowing stream. Royce presses his hands to his face, wiping away the lingering tears before dragging his fingers through his hair. A rustling in the tall grass snaps him out of the trance. His gaze darts around the clearing, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "Who's there?" he calls out, his voice steadier now, the remnants of his emotional turmoil shoved aside. For a moment, only silence greets him. Then, just beyond the edge of the clearing, he sees a figure. This time, not the ghostly apparition, but something much more tangible. The moonlight catches the glint of metal, the subtle outline of a weapon at their side. "Show yourself!" he commands. A moment passes before the figure steps forward, emerging from the shadows. Royce's breath hitches when he recognizes the person standing before him. It's Helga. Her usually composed face is tense, her eyes studying him intently. She takes another step closer. "Who are you speaking to?" she asks, her voice low and cautious. Royce hesitates, unsure of what to say. If he tells her the truth, will she believe him? Or will she think he's lost his mind? Helga tilts her head slightly, her sharp gaze scanning his face for answers. "You were alone when you left the hut, but I saw you kneel. I heard you whispering." She crosses her arms. Royce exhales slowly, his pulse still racing. He knows one thing for certain. Whatever just happened was no ordinary dream. It was a warning. A glimpse into the future he does not yet understand. But first, he must decide whether to trust Helga with what he saw. And that, my friends, brings us to our first voting option of the night. What should Royce do? Oh, sorry. What should Royce do? Get your votes in, my friends. We need to work on our music here. Much better. Much better. Get your votes in. I didn't pee before this, guys. I didn't pee before this. Unlucky. Is Royce going to tell Helga what he saw at the river? Or is he going to tell her it was nothing? What will Royce do? I'm going to pee right now because there's not a vote for a while here. 1 second. And by 1 second, I mean hold on. There we go. Quickest piss ever. We pushed it out like a mother giving birth. Thank you. Robin, good to see you, brother. All right. Tell Helga. Royce takes a deep breath, still shaken by the experience. He glances at the river one last time before turning to Helga. Something in her expression, calm, calculating, yet not unkind, tells him she won't dismiss him outright. And after everything that's happened, he needs to tell somebody. I saw something. No. Someone. He admits, his voice low. It was Octavia. Or at least it looked like her. But she wasn't... He struggles to find the right words. She wasn't real. She was something else. A spirit? A vision? I don't know. Helga's eyes narrow slightly, but she doesn't interrupt. Encouraged, Royce presses on. She showed me things. A battle. Armies. Clashing on an open field. And then he hesitates, unsure if he should continue. The image of himself in the grand hall, crowned and seated beside the woman who is not Octavia, still weighs heavily on his mind. But Helga catches the flicker of doubt in his expression. And then she prompts. Royce exhales sharply. I saw myself in a throne room, a place far greater than Colesvik. And beside me was someone else, a woman I didn't recognize. He clenches his jaw. And I kissed her. Helga is silent for a long moment. The moonlight in her eyes flickers as she studies him, her expression unreadable. Then, in a tone Royce can't quite decipher, she asks, and what do you think it meant? Royce shakes his head. I don't know. Maybe it was a vision of the future. Maybe it was a warning. But it felt real, Helga. As if it was showing me my fate. Or what I'm supposed to change. Helga takes a step closer, folding her arms. There are those who believe the gods send visions to men they deem important. But the gods are not always clear with their intentions. Some visions serve as warnings, others as temptations. She pauses. Tell me, Royce, did this future, this throne, this woman, did it make you feel whole? Royce falters, taken aback by the question. He recalls the scene, the laughter, the crown upon his head, the admiration in the golden-haired woman's eyes. It had seemed right in the vision. Yet now, standing here in the quiet of the night, with the ghostly warmth of Octavia still lingering on his shoulder, the question is less certain. How's it going, Sin? I don't know, he admits. I only know that I wasn't beside her. Helga watches him for a long moment before nodding. Then perhaps that is your answer. Royce furrows his brows. What do you mean? Helga turns her gaze to the sky, where the moon is beginning to set over the fields. We all have choices, Royce. And now, you must decide what this vision means to you. She looks back at him. Is it your destiny? Or is it the fate you wish to fight? Helga motions for Royce to follow her. Now come. Sunrise draws near. As Helga and Royce make their way back to the village, the moon hangs low in the sky, its silver glow beginning to wane against the creeping coil of dawn. A faint glimmer of sunlight breaks over the distant treetops, casting a dim golden hue across the landscape. The journey is quiet, save for the occasional crunch of frost-kissed grass beneath their boots. By the time they step into the longhouse, the scent of smoldering embers and aged wood fills the air. Inside, Thorn and Ingvar are hunched over a large wooden table, its surface cluttered with parchments, ink-stamped maps, and roughly hewn figurines marking key positions. The two men murmur in hushed tones, deep in the throes of strategic planning, their intense focus leaving Royce unnoticed as he slumps into a nearby chair. His body, heavy with exhaustion, protests against him, and despite the weight of the night's events still gnawing at the corners of his mind, sleep begins to pull at him. Helga wastes no time, moving towards Thorn and Ingvar, her sharp gaze scanning the maps as she joins them in preparations. Meanwhile, Royce fights to keep his eyes open, his limbs sluggish, his thoughts foggy. He blinks hard, shaking off the creeping fatigue, but it's no use. Sleep takes him, dragging him under. A sharp jolt jerks him awake. A firm punch lands on his arm, causing his eyes to flutter open against the morning light now spilling into the hall. Royce groans, squinting as his vision adjusts. Standing before him is Octavia, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on her lips. Not where I expected to find you this morning, she teases, her voice carrying a soft, amused tone. Royce groans, rubbing the gunk from his eyes before shifting upright in his chair. His joints ache from sleeping in such an awkward position. Yeah, I couldn't sleep, he mutters. Didn't want to wake you. Octavia tilts her head slightly, her expression shifting from amusement to something softer, more curious. But before she can speak, a commanding voice cuts through the room. Everyone gather round, Thorin announces. The air in the hall shifts as those present move toward the table. Royce drags himself to his feet, shaking off the remnants of sleep as he follows. Helga, Ingvar, and several others encircle the map-covered surface, their faces etched with anticipation. Thorin's gaze sweeps over each of them as he speaks, his tone, even yet carrying the weight of leadership. We've devised a plan that, if executed properly, will grant us access to the fortress without needing to break through the gate. He places a calloused finger on the map, tracing the terrain carefully. Going to the fortress undetected will be the greatest challenge. Using the path Helga and Octavia scouted, we've marked every point where they've encountered sentries. He pauses, allowing those gathered to study the layout. The hand-drawn markings detailing the land, the enemy's positions, and the possible entry points. The tension in the room thickens as minds begin to race, calculating risk and possibilities. Thorin continues, his voice steady. We will split our forces on either side of the path, eliminating any guards we come across before they have a chance to raise the alarm. He lifts his gaze from the map and fixes his eyes on Royce. Once the first sentries are taken care of, Royce and I will don their armor, bearing the colors and sigils of their encampment. From there, we'll gain entry through deception. A ripple of murmurs moves through the group, the weight of the task sinking in. Royce swallows hard, feeling the intensity of Thorin's gaze, knowing the success of this plan will hinge on precision, speed, and trust. The room falls into silence, the next move hanging in the air like a held breath. Thorin lets the silence linger for a moment, his piercing gaze scanning the faces around the table. Then, with a firm nod, he continues. Once inside, Royce and I will take care of the guards at the tower. When the time is right, we will put out the torches, signaling your advance. He gestures to a section of the map, marking a hidden position near the tree line. Helga, you'll lead our forces, keeping low and staying out of sight until the signal comes. Helga nods, her sharp eyes analyzing the plan for anything they might have missed. Octavia studies the map. And once we're inside, Thorin's gaze meets hers. We do what we can to keep things quiet. Eliminate as many as we can before they notice what's happening. Eventually, the fighting will begin. We need to make sure none escape, which is why you and a small group will defend the gate. Octavia nods, the eagerness of being given a responsibility apparent in her demeanor. Thorin continues. We are unsure of who the leader is, nor are we certain of their numbers. However, if things go to plan, we will have the element of surprise, and we will be victorious. The weight of the plan settles over the group. There is no room for error, no second chances. Royce feels a pulse of tension in his chest, but he forces it down. We move at dusk, Thorin declares. Get some rest, gather your gear, and be ready. With that, the meeting disperses. People exchange brief glances, some murmuring to one another as they step away. Helga and Ingvar return to their maps, making final adjustments to their tactics. Royce, still groggy from the interrupted sleep, turns to Octavia. She's still staring at the table, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the map. How do you feel about this? He asks quietly. She glances up at him, her expression thoughtful. It's risky, but it might be our best shot. Royce exhales, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, we just have to make sure everything goes exactly as planned. Octavia smirks, though there's a flicker of unease behind her eyes. Royce, when do things ever go exactly as planned? As the morning stretches on, the village hums with quiet but purposeful energy. Warriors sharpen their blades, fletch new arrows, and reinforce their armor, preparing for the assault ahead. The air is thick with anticipation, and an unspoken tension grips the camp. Each person lost in their own thoughts of what the night might bring. Royce spends the first part of the day trying to distract himself with preparations. He inspects his axes, running a stone along the blades even though they're already sharp. His mind, however, is elsewhere, back to the vision, the woman in the river, and the unsettling image of himself seated on a throne beside someone who is not Octavia. Each time the thought resurfaces, he shoves it down. This is not time to lose focus, he thinks to himself. Later in the afternoon, as the sun reaches its highest point, Royce finds himself sitting on a fallen log near the edge of the village, taking a rare moment of peace. Octavia approaches, dropping down beside him without a word. For a while, they just sit in silence, watching the trees sway in the light breeze. Eventually, she nudges his shoulder with hers. You've been off all day, she says, studying him intently. Royce hesitates. He wants to tell her everything. About the vision, about what he saw in the river, about the strange warmth of the spirit's touch. But something stops him. He forces a smirk instead. Just thinking about tonight, he replies. She doesn't look convinced. She leans in slightly, her voice dropping to a softer tone. Whatever it is, you don't have to keep it to yourself. For a brief moment, he almost tells her, but instead he shakes his head. It's nothing, just nerves. Octavia watches him for a moment longer before exhaling and leaning back against the log. Well, for what it's worth, we'll get through this. We always do. As the sun begins to lower in the sky, the village takes on a more serious tone. This is too happy of music. What the fuck are we? What are we doing? Warriors don their armor, strap on their weapons, and whisper last-minute prayers to the gods. Helga leads a group to do a final scout of the terrain. ensuring nothing has changed since the previous night. She returns before dusk, confirming that the patrols remain the same and that the plan is still viable. Thorin gathers the warriors once more, giving a final speech, his voice steady and commanding, instilling confidence in those who follow him. Tonight, we take back what was stolen from us. We fight not just for revenge, but for our future, for our people, for the lives that will come after us. A low rumble of agreement spreads through the gathered warriors. As twilight sets in, they begin to move. The army does their best to melt into the forest, their steps light, slow, and precise. Every movement is calculated, every breath controlled. The path Octavia and Helga scouted the night before is their guide, leading them through the thick underbrush without detection. Royce's heart pounds as they near the first patrol. Soon, the real test will begin. The first set of sentries looms ahead. 2 men, clad in leather and fur, standing lazily near a torchlit post. They exchange a quiet conversation, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. Helga signals with 2 fingers, then points to herself and Octavia. Royce watches as the 2 women sneak through the darkness, the movement swift and practiced. With a single fluid motion, Octavia covers one man's mouth while driving a dagger into the soft space beneath his ribs. Octavia does the same, and before the guards can so much as gasp, they are lowered to the ground, lifeless. Royce exhales, his grip tightening around his axe. He's killed before, but there's something about the quiet efficiency of it that uneases him. There is no glory in war like the songs proclaim, only blood and silence. Thorin and Royce quickly strip the bodies of armor, exchanging their own garments for the enemy's. Royce pulls on the tough leather and fur, adjusting the belt and cloak to ensure the sigil of the encampment is properly displayed. The outfit smells of sweat and damp earth, but he ignores the discomfort. Are you ready? Thorin asks, fastening his last strap of the stolen gear. Royce nods, though his stomach twists. With their disguise in place, Royce and Thorin step out onto the path, their pace measured and confident. The rest of the group disappears into the shadows once more, moving through the tree line on either side of the road. They carefully eliminate any sentry they come across along the path without raising alarms. The clearing begins to come into view as Helga and Octavia guide their forces into position. Thorin and Royce exchange one final nod before exiting the cover of the forest. As they approach the wooden gate, the 2 sentries atop the watchtowers straighten. One of them leans over, his voice gruff. You're late, one of them calls down. Thorin doesn't hesitate. Yeah, bastards kept us out longer than expected, he grumbles, perfectly mimicking the exhaustion of a soldier who just wants to get off his shift. The guards seem satisfied with the answer. One of them waves a hand in a low creak. The wooden gate swings open, just enough for Royce and Thorin to slip inside. The interior of the stronghold is just as Octavia and Helga had described. Wooden structures lining the inner wall, a small forge glowing in the corner, and a modest longhouse in the center. Viking warriors move about, some drinking, some tending to weapons, and others talking in hushed voices about the upcoming days. Royce forces himself to remain calm, to blend in, knowing if he hesitates even for a moment, he and Thorin will be discovered. One of the passing warriors claps Thorin on the back. About time you got back! The man chuckles before his eyes land on Royce. And who's the new guy? Royce's heart pounds. He knows his accent will betray him if he speaks too much. But before he can respond, Thorin claps a hand on his shoulder. New recruit. Hardly speaks a word. Still a bit green, but he follows orders well enough. The man grunts. As long as he can swing a blade! With that, he moves on, leaving Royce to exhale slowly. Royce turns to thank Thorn, but the words never leave his mouth. A shadow of unease crosses the older warrior's face as his sharp gaze sweeps over the fortress. What is it? Royce whispers. Thorin's eyes flick between the scattered warriors still awake, their torches burning too brightly against the darkened night. His voice is low, urgent. There are too many of them still up. If we make the wrong move, we're dead before we open the gates. Royce swallows hard, scanning the fortress again. He hadn't noticed it at first, but now it's painfully clear. The camp is restless. The night should be quiet, but instead it hums with unwanted life. We need a distraction, Thorn mutters, already thinking ahead. His eyes lock onto a structure near the outskirts of camp. A medium-sized wooden hut stacked high with grain. Without hesitation, he moves, keeping low as he leads Royce toward it. They stick to the shadows, their steps careful and deliberate. When they reach the storage hut, Thorn scans the area, making sure they're alone before plucking a torch from a nearby post. The flames flicker in his grip, casting sharp, erratic shadows over his face. Royce opens his mouth to ask what he's planning, but before he can, Thorn vanishes inside the hut. Royce's pulse pounds in his ears as he waits, nerves prickling beneath his skin. Seconds stretch unbearably long. Then, just as swiftly as he disappeared, Thorn bursts back out, urgency flashing in his eyes. He grabs Royce's arm, dragging him away from the building without a word. Royce barely has time to register what's happening before a sudden cry shatters the night. Fire! The fortress erupts into chaos. Shouts echo through the air as men scramble for buckets, rushing toward the rapidly growing blaze. Thick, dark plumes of smoke billow upward, curling into the night sky like a beacon. Royce glances back, flames already lick hungrily at the wooden structure, devouring it with terrifying speed. Move! Thorn barks, snapping Royce back to reality. Outside the walls, hidden among the trees, Helga and Octavia spot the rising smoke. What's going on? Octavia whispers, her fingers tightening around her bow. Helga's expression hardens, her sharp eyes locking onto the disturbance. It appears things didn't go as planned, she says, voice steady despite the tension. Be ready. Back inside, Thorn and Royce approach the main gate. Only now, the chaos has pulled nearly every warrior away. Only the 2 sentries atop the watchtowers remain, their focus locked on the fire. Thorn signals. Right tower for Royce, left for him. Royce inhales deeply, steeling himself as he ascends the wooden stairs. Each step creaks under the weight, and he winces at every sound, praying the sentry won't notice. At the top, just as he steps onto the platform, the guard turns, his brows furrowing in confusion. Royce lunges at him before he can react. His axe swings at a deadly arc, the blade biting deep into the man's neck. He gasps, a gurgling choke escaping his lips as his hands instinctively grasp at Royce's arms. His eyes, wide with terror, flicker in the dim light before his knees buckle. Royce stands frozen, breath heavy, as the guard crumples to the floor in a lifeless heap. Blood pools across the wooden planks beneath him. Forcing himself to move, he hurries to snuff out the nearby torches, plunging his side of the gate into darkness. Across from him, Thorn does the same, working swiftly and efficiently. With their work complete, they descend the towers, meeting at the massive wooden brace securing the gates. Without a word, they grab hold, muscles straining as they lift the heavy beam. With one last heave, they begin to pull the massive doors open. The heavy wooden gates groan as they swing open, the sound sharp and jarring against the chaos of the fire. A lone man hurrying toward the fire with a bucket of water pauses mid-step, his eyes widening in confusion as he sees the gates beginning to move. "What are you two?" he begins. His words are cut off as a figure appears at the edge of the gate, followed by more shapes emerging from the darkness. Helga, axe in hand, strides forward with Octavia at her side, the rest of the army flanking them like shadows, their faces set with grim determination. The man stares in shock, his mouth working as he drops the bucket of water, the liquid spilling across the ground in a useless arc. Invaders! An arrow whips through the air and strikes the man in the chest with a sickening thud. He gasps, eyes wide in disbelief, as his legs buckle beneath him. At the sound of the commotion, several nearby bandits turn, squinting into the dim light to see what's happening. Their expression shifts from confusion to... Lilac, love. Thank you for the host. We are reading a story right now, a book that we are writing. We will give it a second here. I apologize, guys. I apologize. Let us raise our mugs, our mead horns, and our drinks high in the air for our sister Lilac. A raid worthy of his skull. With that being said, thank you, my sister. I hope you had a wonderful stream. A wonderful stream. To you and to your community. Skull, and welcome in to the Viking Kingdom. Thank you so much. Thank you. Where are we at here? We are, my sister. For all of you that just came in with the raid, we are writing a book here in this kingdom. We are writing a book. Every week we read a chapter of the book. And chat, it's a choose your own adventure book where chat gets to vote on decisions made within the story. We are on chapter 8. In the middle of chapter 8 right now. So if you're looking to bring in the night after a great stream by Lilac, grab some popcorn, grab a drink, and sit tight. At the sound of commotion, several nearby bandits turn, squinting into the dim light to see what's happening. Their expression shifts from confusion to dawning panic as they spot the force assembled at the gate. With a fluid motion, Thorin steps forward, his boots scraping against the stone floor. He methodically unsheathes his sword, the blade gleaming in the low light. His other hand extends, and one of the warriors quickly passes him his shield, which he grabs and holds firm, the weight of it settling against his arm. A silence falls over the courtyard for a fleeting moment, the tension thick as the air around them. Then, Thorin raises his sword high, his voice ringing out with the roar of a warrior's battle cry. For all! The warriors ignite in the hearts of those behind him. Where am I at? I got distracted. In an instant, the men and women gathered charge forward, roaring in unison as they rush into the fortress. The sound of their footsteps thunder across the courtyard. Thank you guys all for the follows. I apologize. We are in the middle of a battle now. We are in the middle of a battle now. Here we go. The fortress plunges into chaos as the battle erupts in full force. The air fills with the clash of steel, the shouts of men and women, and the whistling of arrows as the bandits scramble to join the fray. Caught off guard, many fight without armor, their weapons haphazardly snatched from nearby racks or picked off the ground. In the confusion, their movements are wild and disjointed. Thorin leads the charge, his sword cleaving through enemies as he pushes forward, driving the enemy back with every step. His warriors follow in his wake, pressing their advantage. Royce ducks under a wooden plank swung at his head with a savage yell. The weight of it whistling past his ear. Without missing a beat, he pivots, his body already in motion, and drives one of his axes deep into the back of the man who dared to strike him. The bandit crumples to the ground. Beside him, Helga fights with relentless fury, her axe cleaving through foes as if they were little more than kindling. She shouts over the din, "I got another for you!" Royce glances to his left, where another bandit charges at him with wild desperation. Royce rips his axe free from the fallen man and uses both weapons to block the incoming attack. The bandit presses forward, pushing Royce back, but he doesn't yield. They circle each other, both sizing up the other's moves. Then, out of nowhere, Royce feels a sudden gust of wind. A split second later, an arrow buries itself into the bandit's stomach. The man gasps, his weapon faltering, and Royce takes advantage of the moment, delivering a swift strike to the opponent's side. He looks back to find Octavia standing high atop one of the fortress towers, an archer's silhouette against the night sky. She's already knocking another arrow, her eyes trained on the battlefield below. She winks at Royce before letting the arrow fly, sending it through the air with deadly accuracy. Royce can only watch as another bandit falls to her precise shot. Despite the initial momentum of the invaders, the bandits start to rally. Their attention is no longer divided. They're fully focused on the invaders now. With their numbers, they begin to push back, turning the tide of the battle slowly in their favor. Royce takes a glance around, scanning the battlefield. His heart skips a beat as he spots Thorin and a group of warriors pushing too far ahead, now surrounded and outnumbered. They're being cut off and encircled by the enemy. Without thinking, Royce sprints toward them. But as he rounds the corner of a building, a figure leaps out from the shadows. The man's hands fly at Royce's axe, knocking them from his grasp with a vicious swipe. Royce barely has time to react before the man is on him, tackling him to the ground with a force that knocks him out of breath. The bandit scrabbles to gain the upper hand, trying to pin Royce beneath him. His fist swings, landing squarely on Royce's jaw. Royce grunts, fighting to free his hands. Another punch comes, this time to his eye socket, and the pain flares through his head like wildfire. Blood begins to trickle down his face as he struggles to break free. Finally, he manages to get both hands free, grabbing the man by his shoulders and using his momentum to throw the smaller man off of him. Royce doesn't hesitate. He scrambles for one of his axes, his fingers brushing against the cold wood as he grips it tight. The bandit, now regaining his footing, reaches for a dagger at his side, but Royce is quicker. With his snarl, he swings his axe, landing a brutal blow to the man's shoulder. The bandit screams in agony, clutching at the wound, but he still reaches for the weapon with his free hand. Royce doesn't give him a chance. He swings again, this time landing the axe in the man's chest with a sickening thud. The bandit falls, the life draining from his eyes. Royce stumbles back to his feet, his chest heaving with exertion. His right eye is already beginning to swell, the vision in it becoming blurry and indistinct, but he forces himself to refocus. The battle rages on around him, the clash of steel and the cries of men and women ringing in his ears. There's no time to think about the pain. There's only the fight. Royce once again scans the battlefield desperately, his eyes darting in search of Thorin. But as he does, a sickening realization settles in. Thorin is completely surrounded. He picks up his other axe, gripping it tightly as he steps forward. His foot barely touches the ground before a familiar voice slices through the chaos with like a dagger. Help! Octavia's voice, laced with distress, reaches his ears, pulling him back. He whips around, his pulse quickening. Through the haze of smoke and noise, he spots her. A group of bandits is converging on her small force at the gate, the odds heavily stacked against them. Royce freezes in place, torn between the two fronts. The battle around him continues to spiral, but his attention is fixed on Octavia. Desperate struggle. Thorn and his men are trapped, surrounded by enemies, but Octavia's force is smaller, more vulnerable. They're outnumbered, and Royce knows they won't hold for long without help. Every instinct in him screams to act, but the weight of the decision paralyzes him for a heartbeat. And with that being said, my friends, we have reached our second decision that you as chat gets to make. What is Royce going to do? As a force gathers in around Thorin, the leader of this group, or as a force gathers around Octavia, his lover, what is Royce going to do? It is time to vote! It is time to vote! It's time to vote. It should pop up in chat, my sister. It should pop up in chat. And you should just be able to... No, you're good. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We have a pretty even vote right now. A pretty even vote thus far. Whether to help Octavia or to help Thorin. Thorin is the leader, but Octavia is the love of his life. What are you guys going to choose? What are you going to choose? That's why I love doing this. It's because you guys have a decision to make. As time begins to wane, it is 5-4. It is 5-4. More efficient to see. Ain't that the truth? Save our green-eyed queen. We have about 5 seconds. All right. Let me highlight what you guys chose. Help Octavia. Royce's pulse pounds in his ears as he scans the battlefield. Without wasting another second, he grabs a few warriors nearby and charges toward the gate where Octavia's forces struggle against the enemies. The battle cries cut through the din of clashing steel as they crash into the enemy's rear. The sudden impact sending some bandits sprawling. The man beside Royce lets out a strangled groan. Royce turns just in time to see a blade piercing through his comrade's stomach. A flash of fury overtakes him, and he swings his axe down with unrelenting force, severing the man's arm that he was holding in the sword. The severed limb drops to the blood-soaked earth, but before Royce can react further, another enemy lunges forward, his sword slicing into Royce's side. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Royce shoves past the melee, pushing toward the tower where Octavia stands. A shadow darts ahead of him, One of the bandits slips through the chaos and into the tower. Royce hurls his axe in an attempt to stop him, but a sudden jostle from behind him throws him off balance. The weapon clatters against the side of the tower and falls uselessly to the ground. Snarling in frustration, Royce slashes his remaining axe across the chest of the man who bumped into him before bolting inside. Hot on the heels of the enemy, climbing the stairs. "Octavia!" Royce yells as he takes the stairs two at a time. "There's one coming up!" Before he reaches the final steps, the sound of a gurgling choke stops him. The bandit tumbles back down the staircase, an arrow buried deep in his throat. Royce barely sidesteps the falling corpse before looking up to see Octavia, bow in hand, already knocking another arrow. "Nice shot," he pants, breathless from the sprint. He moves to stand beside her, peering down from the tower. Below, their warriors rally, their renewed strength pushing the bandits back. A few enemy stragglers attempt to flee, but Octavia methodically picks them off one by one, each arrow finding its mark. Roy shifts his gaze beyond the gate, where a more desperate fight unfolds. His stomach tightens. Thorin and his warriors are still encircled, the enemy pressing in with relentless force. Among them, Helga and a small group carve a brutal path toward Thorin, but they are vastly outnumbered. "We need to help Thorin," Royce urges, pointing to the fray. Octavia doesn't immediately respond. Instead, she exhales sharply. "Thorin himself ordered me to not leave this gate." Royce stares at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "Damn it, Octavia! He needs our help!" Her gaze hardens, a steely determination setting into her stance. "Then go help him." Royce hesitates, looking between her and the distant battle. His heart pounds for an eternity, for an entirely different reason now. Before he can stop himself, the words slip out. "I love you." The moment hangs thick between them, suspended in the chaos of war. Octavia's eyes widen slightly, but Royce doesn't wait for her reaction. Instead, he spins on his heel, rushing down the stairs once again, his mind a whirlwind. He reaches the ground, barely slowing as he gathers the remaining warriors, making sure to leave enough behind to defend the gate. With renewed determination, he leads the charge towards Helga and Thorin. The clash of steel grows deafening as they crash into the enemy's forces, hacking their way toward the encircled warriors. The tide begins to turn. The enemy falters under the sudden surge, their formation breaking apart. The brutality of close-quarter combat consumes the battlefield. Blood splatters, bodies crumple, and the air is sick with the scent of sweat and iron. Finally, Royce and his warriors reach Thorin's depleted men. Though exhausted and battered, their morale surges at the sight of reinforcements. Fueled by sheer will, they rally, pushing back against the remaining bandits. The battle, once a deafening storm of clashing steel and dying screams, now ebbs into an uneasy silence. For what feels like an eternity, the chaos lingers, blades still raised, breath still ragged with exhaustion. Then, a desperate voice rises above the battle, crackling with fear. "We surrender!" The words ripple through the battlefield like a shockwave. One by one, the remaining bandits freeze, their weapons slipping from their trembling fingers, clattering uselessly to the blood-soaked earth. Hands lift in surrender, their faces smeared with dirt in desperation. Royce exhales, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the fight. For the first time since the battle began, his eyes find Thorin. The warrior limps forward, his body battered, blood seeping from gashes across his arm and side. Yet, even in his weakened state, his presence remains formidable. He wipes a fresh trickle of blood from his mouth and levels his gaze at the bandit who called for surrender. "Who is your leader?" Thorin's voice is low, hoarse, but filled with unyielding authority. The bandit gulps, nodding toward the large hall looming behind them. He's in there! He stammers, his voice barely above a whisper, as I yell that. Good for me. Good greeting, King. Thorin follows the direction of the man's shaking finger. He spits blood onto the ground, the crimson stalk against the dirt, then turns back to the remaining bandits. Kill them. A single heartbeat of hesitation. Then, without mercy, steel flashes, cutting down the defenseless men where they stand. They collapse in unison, some without so much as a scream, others barely able to process the betrayal before death claims them. The silence that follows is eerie, unnatural. Even the distant sounds of the forest seem to recoil from the slaughter. Thorin stumbles, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. Sorry. Helga and another warrior rush to his side, arms outstretched to support him, but he waves them off with a stubborn grunt. His determination is ironclad, his body fueled by sheer will as he trudges toward the hall. The heavy doors loom before him, the wooden surface streaked with grime and marked by years of wear. He places his hand against them, pausing for the briefest of moments. Then, with a slow, deliberate push, the doors creak open, spilling the dim torchlight from within across the bloodied and battle-worn faces of the remaining warriors. Thorin halts in the doorway, his broad frame casting a long shadow into the dimly lit hall. For a moment, he stands motionless, his breath shallow, his posture rigid, as if frozen in place by an unforeseen force. Then, with a sudden clatter, his sword slips from his grasp, the steel ringing sharply against the wooden floor. The sound echoes through the silence. His shoulders tremble, his knees give way, and before anyone can react, he crumples to the ground. Scene! Chapter 8 of The Tale of a King comes to an end.